In 1847 South Carolina, Overseer Thaddeus Crenshaw ruled Millfield Plantation with an iron fist and leather whip. But on one Sunday morning he was found dead in the chapel pews. 6 slaves had finally fought back. How did they truly pull off the impossible? Tell us which country you're watching from. Subscribe for more hidden historical stories. South Carolina, July 1847. The summer heat pressed down like a heavy blanket. Sweat dripped from every face. The air was so thick you could almost drink it. Millfield Plantation stretched across 3,000 acres of cotton and rice fields. White columns held up the big house like ancient Greek temples. But this was no paradise. The plantation chapel sat on a small hill overlooking the slave quarters. Master Jeremiah Millfield built it with slave labor in 1825. White painted boards gleamed in the morning sun. Tall windows let light stream across wooden pews. A simple wooden cross hung behind the pulpit. Every Sunday, slaves were forced to sit in those pews. They listened to sermons about obeying their masters, about being good servants, about finding joy in suffering. But on this Sunday morning, something was different, very different. The chapel bell should have rung at 7 o'clock. It stayed silent. House slaves noticed first. They always rang that bell to call everyone to worship. The silence felt heavy and wrong. Samuel Jenkins, the head house slave, walked up the hill to investigate. His bare feet made no sound on the dusty path. Cicadas buzzed in the oak trees. Birds sang their morning songs. Everything seemed normal, too normal. Samuel pushed open the chapel door. The hinges creaked like old bones. Sunlight fell across the empty pews in golden stripes. He stepped inside and called out, "Master Crenshaw? You in here, sir?" No answer came back. Thaddeus Crenshaw was the plantation overseer, a hard man with cold blue eyes and quick fists. He carried a leather whip everywhere he went. The slaves called it devil's tongue because it spoke pain in every language. Crenshaw lived in a small house behind the chapel. He was supposed to ring the bell each Sunday morning. Samuel walked down the center aisle between the pews. His footsteps echoed in the empty space. Something felt wrong. The air smelled different, sweet and sour at the same time, like flowers left too long in water. Then he saw it. Thaddeus Crenshaw lay sprawled across the front pew. His arms hung down toward the floor. His face was purple and swollen. His eyes bulged out like a frog's. A piece of rope was wrapped tight around his neck, the same kind of rope used to tie up cotton bales. Samuel's hands shook as he backed toward the door. His heart pounded like thunder in his chest. Crenshaw was dead. Someone had killed him, right here in God's house, right here where slaves came to pray for freedom they would never see. The overseer's whip lay on the floor beside the pew. Devil's tongue would never speak again. Samuel stared at that whip and felt something he had never felt before. Relief. Pure, clean relief. But then fear rushed in like cold water. Someone would pay for this. Many someones. When a white man died, black people suffered. That was the way of things in South Carolina. That was the law written in blood and fear. Samuel ran from the chapel as fast as his old legs could carry him. He had to tell Master Millfield. He had to tell everyone. The overseer was dead in the house of God, murdered while the world slept. As he ran down the hill, Samuel's mind raced with questions. Who could have done this? Who would dare kill a white man? Who had the courage to face certain death for a moment of revenge? The morning sun climbed higher in the sky. The heat grew stronger with each passing minute. Somewhere in the slave quarters, 6 people knew the answers to Samuel's questions. 6 people who had finally said, "Enough." 6 people who had turned the house of prayer into a house of justice. The chapel bell remained silent, but soon other bells would ring. Alarm bells, warning bells. The bells that meant trouble was coming like a storm across the fields. Blood had been spilled in the name of freedom. Now someone would pay the price. They called themselves the Circle. 6 people bound together by pain and hope. They met in secret places where white eyes couldn't see. The rice mill after midnight, the old tobacco barn on moonless nights, the cypress swamp where alligators kept watch better than any guard. Each one had their reasons for wanting Thaddeus Crenshaw dead. Each one brought something special to their deadly plan. Moses Washington was their leader, 35 years old with shoulders like tree trunks. He had worked the rice field since he was 8 years old. His back showed every lash from Crenshaw's whip. 47 scars that told 47 stories of punishment. Moses could lift a full cotton bale by himself. He could also snap a man's neck with those powerful hands. "That man ain't human," Moses would whisper during their secret meetings. "He takes pleasure in our pain, like it feeds something dark inside him." Sarah Chen worked in the big house kitchen, 28 years old with quick eyes and quicker ears. She heard everything the white folks said when they thought no one was listening. Sarah knew which guests were coming to visit, which business deals Master Millfield was making, which slaves might be sold next. But most importantly, Sarah knew Crenshaw's habits. When he drank too much whiskey, when he stumbled home from town, when he slept so deep that thunder wouldn't wake him. "He drinks every Saturday night," Sarah told the others, "comes back to his cabin drunk as a skunk, sleeps until the sun is high on Sunday." Benjamin Torres was the plantation carpenter, 42 years old with hands that could build anything from cradles to coffins. He made furniture for the big house, fixed broken tools in the blacksmith shop, built the very chapel where they would gather every Sunday to hear about patience and forgiveness. Benjamin knew rope better than anyone on the plantation. How to tie knots that would hold a barn together in a hurricane. How to weave strands that could lift heavy loads without breaking. How to make a noose that would do its job quickly and quietly. "Rope don't lie," Benjamin said, testing the strength of his handiwork. "It holds what needs holding. It breaks what needs breaking." Mercy Williams had lost everything that mattered. Her daughter Lucy died 3 months ago from a beating that went too far. The little girl was only 6 years old. She had dropped a basket of eggs while running errands for the big house. Crenshaw whipped her until she stopped breathing. Mercy was 30 years old and had nothing left to lose. Her heart died with her baby girl. Now she carried only rage where love used to live. "He killed Lucy for a dozen eggs," Mercy said, her voice flat as still water. "Ain't no God gonna forgive that. Ain't no law gonna punish it. So we got to handle it ourselves." Joshua Martinez was just 17, but already broken by the plantation system. His parents were sold when he was 12. His sister was taken to the big house for things no girl should endure. Joshua worked the stables and tended the master's horses. He was fast and smart and angry as a hornet's nest. "I ain't living my whole life under that man's whip," Joshua said during one of their meetings. "Rather die fighting than live crawling." The oldest member of their circle was Reverend Thomas Anderson, 63 years old with gray hair and gentle hands. He led the slaves in prayer when they gathered for secret worship in the quarters. He had seen 3 generations of his family sold away from him. He had watched children grow up in chains. He had buried too many people who died from overwork and punishment. But Thomas also knew the Bible better than the white preacher who visited on Sundays. He knew that sometimes God worked through human hands. Sometimes justice came from unexpected places. "The Lord helps those who help themselves," Thomas would say, his voice carrying the weight of decades. Maybe it's time we stopped waiting for heaven and started making some changes right here on earth. Together, these 6 people had everything they needed for their plan. Moses had the strength. Sarah had the information. Benjamin had the skills. Mercy had the motivation. Joshua had the speed. Thomas had the wisdom and the blessing of heaven. They spent months watching Crenshaw's patterns, learning his routines, planning every detail of their revenge. They knew the risks. Getting caught meant death by hanging for all of them, but staying quiet meant watching Crenshaw destroy more lives. More children would die. More families would be torn apart. More souls would be crushed under his boots. The decision was easy once they looked at it that way. "We all gonna die someday," Moses told the group during their final meeting. "Question is whether we die like men and women or like animals." They chose to die like free people. But first, they would make sure Crenshaw died like the monster he was. Sunday morning was coming fast. The day of reckoning was almost here. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in March. Little Lucy Williams was carrying eggs from the chicken coop to the big house kitchen. She was only 6 years old with pigtails that bounced when she walked. Her mother Mercy had braided them that morning with strips of cloth. Lucy tried to be careful with the basket. She knew what happened to slaves who broke things. But the path was muddy from spring rain. Her bare feet slipped in the red clay. The basket tumbled from her small hands. 12 white eggs cracked open on the ground like broken promises. Thaddeus Crenshaw heard the crash from his cabin porch. He had been drinking whiskey since breakfast. The empty bottle sat beside his chair like a glass companion. His face was already red from liquor and heat. Now it turned purple with rage. "What did you do, you worthless little animal?" Crenshaw roared as he stormed toward the child. Lucy started crying. She dropped to her knees and tried to scoop the broken eggs back into the basket. Yellow yolk and clear whites mixed with mud between her fingers. "I'm sorry, Master Crenshaw," she sobbed. "I didn't mean to drop them. My foot just slipped and—" The first blow knocked her flat on her back. Crenshaw's heavy boot caught her in the ribs. She gasped like a fish pulled from water. The second kick hit her stomach. The third landed on her head. Other slaves heard the screaming and came running. Moses Washington arrived first. He saw little Lucy curled up in the mud while Crenshaw kicked her like a dog. Her mother Mercy pushed through the crowd, trying to reach her baby. "Please stop, Master Crenshaw," Mercy begged. "She's just a child." She didn't mean no harm, but Crenshaw was beyond reason. The whiskey had poisoned his brain. His rage had taken control of his body. He pulled Devil's Tongue from his belt. The leather whip uncoiled like a snake ready to strike. "Dozen eggs cost more than this little nigger is worth," he snarled. "Time she learned the price of carelessness." The whip came down across Lucy's back. Her dress tore open. Blood appeared like red flowers on white cotton. She screamed so loud that birds flew from nearby trees. "Stop!" Mercy threw herself between the whip and her daughter. "Beat me instead." "Please? She's too small." Crenshaw backhanded Mercy across the face. She fell hard beside her child. Blood trickled from her split lip. "Nobody tells me how to discipline slaves," Crenshaw growled. "This little animal needs to learn respect." The whip rose and fell 12 more times, once for each broken egg. Lucy's screams grew weaker with each strike. Her small body shook like a leaf in a storm. Finally, she stopped moving altogether. Mercy crawled to her daughter and gathered the tiny broken body in her arms. Lucy's eyes stared at nothing. Her chest didn't rise or fall. The child who had been braiding corn silk that morning was gone forever. "You killed her," Mercy whispered, her voice flat as still water. "You killed my baby over some eggs." Crenshaw coiled his whip and walked away. "Should have raised her to be more careful," he said without looking back. That night the circle met in the old tobacco barn. Moses paced like a caged animal, his hands clenched and unclenched as he spoke. "That man ain't human," he said for the 100th time. "No human being beats a child to death over eggs." Sarah Chen wiped tears from her eyes. She had held little Lucy while Mercy dug the grave behind the slave quarters. "Something's got to be done about him. This can't keep happening." Benjamin Torres nodded his agreement. Men like that don't deserve to breathe the same air as decent folk. But it wasn't just Lucy's death that pushed them over the edge. The beatings had been getting worse for months. Crenshaw seemed to enjoy causing pain more than preventing problems. 2 weeks before Lucy died, he whipped Joshua Martinez until the boy passed out. His crime? Moving too slow while mucking horse stalls. The beating left scars that would never heal. A month before that, Crenshaw broke Samuel Johnson's arm with a shovel handle. Samuel had been working in the vegetable garden when Crenshaw decided the rows weren't straight enough. The bone healed crooked because no doctor would treat a slave. The worst incident happened to Moses himself in January. Crenshaw accused him of stealing corn from the barn. There was no evidence, no missing corn, but Crenshaw needed an excuse to use his whip. He tied Moses to a post and beat him until blood pooled in the dirt. 50 lashes for a crime that never happened. "Every day we wait, somebody else gonna die," Moses told the group. "How many more children got to bleed before we say enough?" Reverend Thomas Anderson spoke up from the shadows. "The good book says, 'Thou shalt not kill,' but it also says, 'an eye for an eye.'" Maybe it's time we balanced the scales. They spent hours that night discussing their options. Running away meant death if they got caught. Complaining to Master Millfield was pointless. He trusted Crenshaw completely. Besides, dead slaves couldn't earn money. The master would just buy replacements. "Only one solution I can see," Benjamin said quietly. "World would be a better place without Thaddeus Crenshaw in it." The words hung in the air like smoke from a cooking fire. Once spoken, they couldn't be taken back. Everyone in that barn understood what Benjamin meant. They were talking about murder. "Y'all know what happens if we get caught," Sarah warned. "They'll hang every one of us. No trial, no mercy, just rope and trees." Joshua laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "They gonna kill us anyway. Might as well go down fighting." Mercy hadn't spoken since they gathered. She sat in the corner, holding Lucy's favorite doll, a cornhusk figure with button eyes and yarn hair. Now she looked up at the others with eyes like winter ice. "I buried my baby today," she said simply. "Ain't nothing left for them to take from me. I'm in." One by one, they agreed. The circle became a conspiracy. 6 people who had nothing left to lose except their lives, and they were willing to risk those for a chance at justice. The planning began that night. Crenshaw's last Sunday was coming soon. Every scar had a story. Every mark on their bodies was a memory written in pain. The 6 members of the circle carried their histories on their skin like maps of suffering. Each one had traveled a different road to Millfield Plantation, but they all ended up in the same place, under Thaddeus Crenshaw's whip. Moses Washington came to the plantation when he was 8 years old. His mother died in childbirth back in Georgia. His father was sold to pay the master's gambling debts. Little Moses rode in a wagon with 12 other children, all of them crying for parents they would never see again. The slave trader sold Moses at the Charleston market for $60. Master Millfield needed strong boys to work the rice fields. He looked at Moses's shoulders and arms, felt his muscles like he was buying a horse, decided the boy would grow into a good worker. Moses learned to hate the rice fields. The water came up to his waist during planting season. Snakes swam between the rows. His feet stayed wet and wrinkled for months. But the worst part was Crenshaw. Even then, the overseer enjoyed hurting children. The first beating came when Moses was 10. He moved too slow, bringing water to the field hands. Crenshaw used a switch on the boy's legs, 20 strokes that left welts for weeks. "Pain teaches better than words," Crenshaw said, while Moses cried in the mud. "Remember that feeling next time you think about being lazy." 25 years later, Moses had 47 scars on his back, 47 lessons that Crenshaw had taught with leather and pain. Each one made him stronger. Each one made him angrier. Sarah Chen's story started different but ended the same way. She was born free in Charleston. Her father was a Chinese sailor who jumped ship. Her mother was a freed slave who took in washing. They lived in a small house near the harbor, but freedom for black people was always fragile in South Carolina. When Sarah turned 15, slave catchers grabbed her off the street. They claimed she was a runaway. Her parents had no papers to prove she was born free, no money for lawyers, no white friends to speak up for them. Master Millfield bought Sarah at auction for $90. House slaves cost more than field hands. She could read and write. She knew how to cook fancy meals. She was perfect for kitchen work. Crenshaw tested her the first week she arrived. He claimed she burned the biscuits for breakfast. She hadn't, but he needed an excuse to establish control. "Freeborn. Niggers think they're special," he said, preparing his whip. "Time you learned your proper place." 20 lashes across her back taught Sarah that freedom was just a word. She had been free for 15 years. She had been a slave for 13 years. The scars reminded her which life was real. Benjamin Torres was born on the plantation. His parents worked the rice fields before him. His grandparents came from Africa on a slave ship. He had never known anything but Millfield Plantation, but Benjamin had skills that made him valuable. His father taught him carpentry before dying from fever. Benjamin could build anything from cradles to coffins. Master Millfield rented out his services to other plantations. Benjamin earned money for his master and learned skills for himself. The problem was that Benjamin thought like a free man. He took pride in his work. He asked questions about techniques. He suggested improvements to building designs. Crenshaw didn't like slaves who acted intelligent. The worst beating came 3 years ago. Benjamin had built a beautiful cabinet for the big house. Master Millfield praised the work in front of guests. He said Benjamin was the best carpenter in the county. Crenshaw caught Benjamin smiling at the compliments. "What you grinning about, boy?" the overseer demanded later. "Just happy the master likes my work, sir," Benjamin replied honestly. The whip came down 30 times. "Slaves don't feel pride," Crenshaw snarled with each stroke. "Pride is for white men. You just do what you're told. Joshua Martinez lost his family when he was 12. His parents and sister were sold to settle Master Millfield's debts. A cotton plantation in Mississippi bought all 3 for $400. Joshua watched them loaded onto a wagon like furniture being moved. He never saw them again. Letters were forbidden. Visits were impossible. For 5 years, Joshua worked alone in the world, taking care of the master's horses, sleeping in the stable loft, dreaming of escape. Crenshaw picked on Joshua because the boy was young and alone. No parents to cry when he got beaten. No family to comfort him afterward. Just a teenager trying to survive on his own. Last year, Joshua asked permission to marry Anna Thompson. She worked in the vegetable garden. They were both 17 and in love. Master Millfield said yes to the marriage. Crenshaw said no to Joshua's happiness. The night before the wedding, he sold Anna to a plantation in Georgia, claimed the master needed quick cash. Joshua woke up to find his bride-to-be gone forever. Reverend Thomas Anderson had the longest memory and the most scars. He remembered when Crenshaw first arrived at the plantation 20 years ago. Back then, the old overseer was firm but fair. He punished laziness, but not harshly. He never killed anyone over broken eggs. Crenshaw was different from the beginning. He enjoyed causing pain. He smiled during beatings. He invented new punishments just to watch people suffer. Thomas had watched the man grow more evil with each passing year. Now Thomas was 63 years old. His back showed 2 decades of Crenshaw's lessons. His heart carried the weight of burying too many people who died from beatings, overwork, and despair. Each member of the circle had their reasons. Each one carried scars that demanded justice. Together, they would make sure those scars finally meant something. Saturday night, July 17th, 1847. Thaddeus Crenshaw sat on his cabin porch with a bottle of whiskey for company. The glass was already half empty. Soon it would be completely gone, just like every Saturday night for the past 5 years. The overseer loved his weekend ritual. Work ended at sunset on Saturday. The slaves went back to their quarters. Master Millfield retired to the big house with his books and brandy. Crenshaw had the plantation almost to himself. He drank to forget the war memories that haunted his sleep, Mexican war battles where men died screaming in the desert heat. He drank to drown the voices that whispered he was becoming a monster. Most of all, he drank because whiskey made him feel powerful instead of empty. The circle watched from the shadows. Sarah Chen peered through the kitchen window. Moses Washington stood behind the barn. Benjamin Torres waited near the tool shed. They had been watching Crenshaw's Saturday routine for months. Tonight, everything had to go perfectly. "He's almost finished with the bottle," Sarah whispered to Joshua Martinez, who crouched beside the chicken coop. "Give him another hour, and he'll be passed out cold." The plan was simple, but deadly. Crenshaw would drink himself unconscious, just like every Saturday night. He would sleep until late Sunday morning, missing the chapel bell that called everyone to worship. The circle would be waiting for him when he finally woke up. Sunday morning arrived with heavy clouds and thick air. A storm was building somewhere beyond the horizon, the kind of storm that made the air feel electric and dangerous. At 7 o'clock, the chapel bell remained silent. Samuel Jenkins, the head house slave, noticed first. He always rang that bell to call everyone to worship, but today he waited. The circle had asked him to wait just 1 hour, just long enough for their plan to work. Moses Washington knocked on Crenshaw's cabin door at 8 o'clock. No answer came from inside. He knocked again, harder this time. "Master Crenshaw?" Moses called out in his most respectful slave voice. "You missed the chapel bell, sir." Everyone's waiting for Sunday service to start. Still no answer. Moses pushed the door open and stepped inside. The cabin reeked of whiskey and sweat. Crenshaw lay sprawled across his bed, fully dressed and snoring like a bull. The empty bottle had rolled onto the floor. Perfect. Moses whistled softly. A bird call that meant all clear to the others. Within minutes, the circle gathered in the cabin doorway. 6 people who had endured years of brutality. 6 people who had finally reached their breaking point. "Is he breathing?" Mercy Williams asked, staring at the man who killed her daughter. "Unfortunately, yes," Moses replied, "but not for much longer." Benjamin Torres held a coil of rope in his hands, the same kind of rope used to bind cotton bales, strong enough to hold 1,000 pounds of cotton, strong enough to hold one evil man until he stopped struggling. "We sure about this?" Reverend Thomas Anderson asked one final time. "Once we cross this line, there ain't no going back." "He crossed the line when he beat little Lucy to death," Mercy said, her voice flat as winter ice. "We're just evening the score." They dragged Crenshaw from his bed while he was still unconscious. The overseer was heavy with muscle and whiskey, but Moses was stronger. Joshua and Benjamin helped carry the dead weight between them. The chapel sat empty on the hill. No one questioned why the Sunday service was delayed. Slaves had learned not to ask questions about white folks' business. They waited in their quarters and minded their own affairs. Inside the chapel, sunlight streamed through tall windows. Dust motes danced in the golden beams like tiny spirits. The wooden cross behind the pulpit cast a long shadow across the altar. This was supposed to be God's house. Today, it would become a courtroom where justice was finally served. They laid Crenshaw across the front pew, his head hanging over the edge. He was starting to stir from his drunken sleep. His eyes fluttered open and tried to focus on the faces above him. Where am I?" he mumbled, still half drunk and confused. "You're in church, Master Crenshaw," Moses said calmly. "Time for your final prayer." Understanding crept into the overseer's eyes like sunrise breaking through clouds. He tried to sit up, tried to reach for the whip that wasn't there, but 6 pairs of hands held him down against the wooden pew. "You can't do this," Crenshaw gasped, his voice cracking with fear. "I'm a white man." "You'll all hang for touching me." "We're already dead," Mercy replied, looking down at the man who murdered her child. "You killed us piece by piece, day by day. This is just making it official." Benjamin Torres had the rope ready, a perfect noose tied with knots he had learned as a carpenter, knots that would hold tight and never slip. The rope went around Crenshaw's neck, smooth as silk. "Wait!" the overseer screamed, struggling against hands that were stronger than his fear. "I can change. I can be better, please." But the time for mercy had passed long ago. It died with little Lucy Williams. It died with every slave who had bled under his whip. It died with every family torn apart by his cruelty. The rope tightened. Crenshaw's eyes bulged like a frog's. His face turned purple, then blue. His legs kicked against the pew, but found no purchase. The sounds he made weren't human anymore, just the desperate gurgles of a dying animal. Sarah Chen watched, the life leave his eyes. "That's for every child you hurt," she whispered. Joshua Martinez saw the last breath leave his body. "That's for every family you destroyed." Reverend Thomas Anderson made the sign of the cross over the corpse. "May God have mercy on your soul," he said quietly, "because we couldn't." They arranged the body carefully across the front pew, arms folded over the chest like he was sleeping, the rope still tight around his neck like a twisted necktie. Devil's Tongue lay on the floor beside him, coiled up like the snake it had always been. "It's finished," Moses said, looking at their handiwork. "Justice is finally served." The storm clouds were gathering faster now. Thunder rumbled in the distance like God's own voice. Rain would come soon to wash the world clean. But first, someone would have to discover what they had done. Someone would have to find Thaddeus Crenshaw's body in the house of God and raise the alarm. The manhunt would begin within hours. Samuel Jenkins found the body at 9 o'clock Sunday morning. The old house slave climbed the hill to see why the chapel bell hadn't rung. His arthritic knees protested every step. But duty is stronger than pain. The chapel door stood slightly open. Morning light slanted through the crack like a golden blade. Samuel pushed it wider and stepped inside. The smell hit him first, sweet and sour mixed together. Death had its own perfume. Thaddeus Crenshaw lay sprawled across the front pew like a discarded coat. His purple face stared at the wooden cross above the altar. The rope around his neck told the whole story. Someone had finally silenced Devil's Tongue forever. Samuel's hands shook as he backed toward the door. 40 years on this plantation had taught him one iron rule. When white men died, black men suffered. Always. No exceptions. He ran down the hill faster than his old legs had moved in years. His breath came in short gasps. His heart hammered against his ribs like a caged bird. Behind him, the chapel bell tower stood silent as a tombstone. "Master Millfield!" Samuel burst through the back door of the big house. "Master Millfield, you gotta come quick!" Jeremiah Millfield sat at his breakfast table reading a Charleston newspaper. Bacon grease glistened on his plate. Coffee steamed in his cup. Sunday morning was his quiet time. He didn't appreciate interruptions. "What's all this noise, Samuel?" Master Millfield folded his paper with sharp creases. "You know better than to come running in here like the devil's chasing you." "It's Master Crenshaw, sir." Samuel twisted his hat in his hands. He's dead, sir. Up in the chapel. Someone killed him." The words hit Master Millfield like cold water. His coffee cup rattled against the saucer as he set it down. His face went white as his Sunday shirt. Dead? What do you mean dead? Rope around his neck, sir. Strangled like a chicken, laying right across the front pew. Master Millfield stood so fast his chair fell, backward. His boots thundered across the floor as he headed for the door. Samuel followed behind like a faithful dog. The chapel looked different now. What had been God's house became a crime scene. Sunlight through the windows seemed harsh instead of holy. The wooden cross cast shadows that looked like prison bars. Master Millfield stared at his overseer's corpse with growing horror. Crenshaw had worked this plantation for 5 years. Brutal, but effective. He kept the slaves in line and the cotton growing. Now he was nothing but meat cooling in the morning air. Who could have done this? Master Millfield whispered to himself. Then louder, who would dare? But they both knew the answer. Only slaves had reason to want Crenshaw dead. Only slaves suffered under his whip day after day. The question wasn't who wanted him gone. The question was who had the courage to make it happen. Send word to Sheriff Mason, Master Millfield ordered. Tell him to come immediately. And, Samuel, don't let any slaves near this chapel. Nobody goes in or out until the law gets here. Sheriff William Mason arrived within an hour, a big man with gray whiskers and hard eyes. He had dealt with slave troubles before, usually ended with someone swinging from a tree. Ugly business, Jeremiah, the sheriff said, examining the body. Professional job, though. Whoever did this knew about knots and strangulation, not some crime of passion. You think it was planned? Oh, this was planned all right, probably for weeks or months. The question is, how many were involved? One slave couldn't handle Crenshaw alone. Man was strong as an ox. The sheriff walked around the chapel like a hound dog following a scent. He checked for footprints in the dust. I looked for disturbed dirt outside the windows, examined the rope around Crenshaw's neck with professional interest. This rope came from your own plantation, Sheriff Mason announced. Same kind you use for baling cotton. Inside job for certain. By noon, the questioning began. Sheriff Mason set up in the chapel itself, made each slave stand where Crenshaw had died while he asked his questions. Psychology was important in these situations. Fear makes people confess faster than truth. Moses Washington came first. The big man's face showed nothing as he answered questions. Yes, he knew Crenshaw was strict. No, he never threatened the overseer. Yes, he was in his cabin Saturday night. His wife could confirm it. But the sheriff noticed things. How Moses's hands clenched when he mentioned Crenshaw's name. How his jaw tightened when asked about recent punishments. How his eyes flicked toward the rope still hanging around the dead man's neck. Sarah Chen answered quietly and respectfully. She worked in the kitchen, she said. Saw Master Crenshaw at dinner Saturday night. He seemed normal, drank his usual amount. She went to bed early and heard nothing unusual. The sheriff watched her hands, though, how they trembled slightly when she spoke. How she avoided looking directly at the corpse. How she kept glancing toward the chapel door like she wanted to run. Benjamin Torres stood straight and proud despite the circumstances. He was the plantation carpenter, he explained. He knew about ropes and knots from his work, but he would never use those skills to hurt anyone. That would be wrong. Yet Sheriff Mason noticed the calluses on Benjamin's hands. The rope burned on his palms that looked fresh. The way he studied the knot around Crenshaw's neck was like he was examining his own handiwork. One by one, the questioning continued. Joshua Martinez, Mercy Williams, Reverend Thomas Anderson. Each one claimed innocence. Each one had an alibi. Each one showed signs that made the sheriff more suspicious. Fear spread through the slave quarters like wildfire. Children cried in their mothers' arms. Old people shook their heads and prepared for the worst. Everyone knew what happened when white men died on plantations. Justice came swift and harsh. By evening, Sheriff Mason had his list of suspects. 6 names written in careful handwriting. 6 people who had motive, opportunity, and something to hide. 6 souls who might soon dance on the end of a rope. The manhunt was about to begin. Monday morning brought bloodhounds and bounty hunters. Sheriff Mason arrived with a dozen armed men and 4 trained dogs, the kind of dogs that could track a scent through swamp water and Spanish moss. The kind of men who collected money for bringing back runaway slaves, dead or alive. 6 suspects, Sheriff Mason announced to Master Millfield. All with motive, all with opportunity. We'll have them in chains by sunset. But the circle had vanished like morning mist. Their cabins stood empty. Their work tools lay abandoned. Even their few possessions had disappeared in the night. Somewhere between Sunday evening prayers and Monday dawn, 6 people had melted into the South Carolina wilderness. The manhunt began at the slave quarters. Bloodhounds sniffed at empty beds and cold fire pits. They picked up scent trails leading toward the river, toward the cypress swamps where alligators ruled and white men feared to go. Moses Washington had planned their escape route for weeks. He knew every deer path through the wetlands, every island of solid ground and miles of black water, every hiding place where Spanish moss hung thick enough to hide a person's shape. The 6 fugitives moved like ghosts through water that came up to their waists. Sarah Chen carried dried food wrapped in oilcloth. Benjamin Torres brought rope and tools for building shelters. Joshua Martinez scouted ahead for dangers, both human and animal. Behind them, dogs bayed like demons in the distance. Men cursed and shouted as they struggled through unfamiliar terrain. But the swamp belonged to the slaves who had hidden there for generations. It protected its children from those who would harm them. For 3 days, the chase continued. Bounty hunters on horseback found their animals useless in the muddy water. Bloodhounds lost the scent where creeks joined rivers. Professional trackers admitted defeat in terrain that shifted like a living thing. On the 4th day, the search parties found evidence of a struggle. Torn clothing caught on cypress roots, blood on a fallen log, signs that someone had fought desperately for their life and lost. "Gators got them," one bounty hunter declared, pointing at drag marks leading into deep water. "Nothing left to find but bones, and the swamp will keep those forever." Sheriff Mason agreed reluctantly. 6 fugitives had entered the wetlands. 6 sets of tracks had disappeared into water and mud. Whether taken by alligators, quicksand, or their own desperation, the result was the same. Justice had been served by nature instead of law. The official report listed all 6 suspects as deceased by misadventure while resisting capture. Case closed, problem solved, order restored to Millfield Plantation, but some stories whispered different endings. Boat captains reported seeing mysterious figures on moonless nights. Former slaves spoke of helpers who appeared when runaways needed guidance north. Children sang songs about 6 spirits who still watched over those who suffered. The truth disappeared with the suspects themselves. Whether they died in the swamps or found freedom beyond South Carolina's borders, no one could say for certain. They had become legends, and legends never truly die. Today, tourists visit the restored Millfield Plantation Chapel. White paint gleams on wooden walls like it did in 1847. Tour guides tell sanitized stories about plantation life. They mention the unfortunate incident when the overseer died mysteriously. But they never tell the real story. Local historians know the truth, though. Court records still exist. Newspaper accounts from Charleston describe the manhunt for 6 suspected murderers. The bodies were never found. The case was never solved. Old folks in rural South Carolina still whisper different tales. They speak of 6 shadows seen near abandoned plantation chapels on moonless nights. Visitors report strange feelings in empty churches, cold spots where no wind blows, voices that whisper about justice finally served. Maybe they're still out there. 6 souls who refuse to stay silent. 6 spirits who remind us that some fights never end. If this story amazed you, hit the like button. Share this with your friends and family. Got questions or know similar stories? Drop them in the comments. Subscribe for more incredible historical mysteries like this.